Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks, where kindred souls gather to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as a February room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for Composite Development's fly rods and fishing accessories. Tech, precision, ingenuity, legacy. Go to cdfishing.us and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Here's your host, Lauren Carnop, and this is the February Room.
Welcome to the February Room. Today, my guest is Eddie Olwell. He's the outfitter at Fishs Eddy O. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. And I have to say, Eddie, I've gone to your website, and the first thing that I was able to notice is that you are quoted as, "This is where the stories begin." And I think that's such a great way to start this podcast, is with a story. And I know you have some, so I'd love to hear one from you.
I've got a long story.
Let's hear it. I've got time.
I was thinking about this a lot lately, my journey, and I really can attribute my life right now to this one moment and place and time. In 1975, when I caught my first trout in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. I came from a family of fishermen. My brothers, primarily, I have two older brothers, and always took me around. My dad wasn't an outdoorsman, but my grandfather on my mother's side was. He died when I was young, but he instilled, fishing and outdoors into my brothers, and they picked up where he left off and took me along. So 13 years old, 1975, I think it was July. My oldest brother, Bob, he was 28. And he had a friend who had a cabin up in the Catskills, and he was going up for the weekend. I think he was going to golf or do something with them. And he said, "You want to come? And there's a trout stream there. You can go fishing." So I was like, sure. And I'm so thankful that my brothers were so willing to drag their little brother along, even, in their 20s. I mean, who wants a little kid, following your heels around? But anyhow, we got up there, and my other brother, Jim, set me up with a little spinning rod, like a light spinning rod, and told me how to bounce the bait off the bottom, and gave me some MEP spinners, and had everything I needed. And so my brother said, "Okay, we're going, and there's the stream. Here's your stuff. We'll see you tonight. Don't get hurt. Don't get into trouble." So I went across from the cabin, and it was just this. And the thing is, it was so long ago, it's so crystal clear in my memory. And there was just crystal clear little mountain stream that you could, took 2 hops to get across it. And brother told me to fish the pools, and I got out there and started drifting my bait down into this pool. And I just loved how the water was so crystal clear, and the rocks were like emerald on the bottom. And I just thought it was like one of the prettiest things I'd ever seen. And so I drifted this, I don't know, it was a salmon egg or a worm or whatever, and I think they were probably stock trout, to this undercut bank in this deep pool, and I saw a flash, and my line went tight, and I caught this little brookie, and I was so ecstatic. And I managed to end up catching, 6 or 8 trout that day, hitting all the little pools, and I had this stringer of brookies. And so my brother came back from golfing, and there I was with this stringer of trout. He grabbed my rod and ran over to the creek. And he's like, "I want to catch some." And, but that really, I always liked to fish. I started fishing when I was 4 in lakes and the ocean. But I just fell in love with trout fishing, and the fish were so colorful and beautiful. And I just said, I want to trout fish. And I started reading books about trout fishing and, fishing magazines, and anything I could, I got information on it. And then I realized in a short amount of time that fly fishing was really the way to trout fish. And so a year or 2 later, I got a cheap fly rod for my birthday, and that started my fly fishing career. But that is so important because it really, it sounds silly, but it changed the trajectory of my life.
Oh, I don't think it's silly at all. And those small brookies, they are the most colorful. I mean, even though they don't have the mass, and I think they're a lot more fun sometimes to catch because they just have really tons of beauty to them. And I know we were talking about earlier, because you really do have that base of how important fly fishing is for you. You didn't start off in a career as a outfitter or guide. You had a very different, stressful life as working in corporate Wall Street. And I'd love to hear your journey from going from something as intense as that to living in a small town in Montana.
Yeah. Well, as you know, like I was saying, as a kid, I just started reading everything about fly fishing and trout fishing. And, I read about Montana, and everything I read was about like the Madison and the fire hole. And fortunately, my other brother, Jim, decided to take me on a trip to Yellowstone to fish all these rivers we'd been reading about in books. And so in 1977 at 15, my brother Jim, who was about 24, and his two buddies came out, and we backpacked around Yellowstone for about 10 days. And we drove and we hit the Madison, the fire hole, and all these rivers that I had just read so much about. And being a kid from New Jersey, I had never seen anything like Montana. And I remember telling my friends when I came home, it's like, I could look as far as I could see and not see a house, or look out and not see a light. I could not believe that, coming from the most congested state in the country. And so that continued my journey. And that again started with that brook trout. And I started doing research in the library about careers. I was getting closer to college age and starting to think about, where I wanted to go to college and what I wanted to major in. And I read a lot about, fisheries biologists, and I was thinking maybe I'd like to be a park ranger in Yellowstone. And so at some point, I guess when I was about 17, I told my father, what I wanted to major in, what I wanted to do for a living. He looked like he was gut shot. My dad was a very practical, conservative guy. He grew up as a kid in the Depression. He served in World War II. And he just looked at me and he said, "You cannot make a living at that outdoor crap." He goes, "You do that on the weekends. You need to get a real job." And so unfortunately, he quashed my passion for the outdoors and wanting to pursue this career. And, being a kid, you listen to your parents and their advice, and they were helping me pay for school. So I went to a small liberal arts school, Lemoyne College in upstate New York, and I got an economics degree. So I really enjoyed college. I got good enough grades to stay there. I knew that was important, and had probably a above average social life, and average grades. So I got out of college in 1984. And for those who are not young enough to remember, it was a real time of boom economically. Ronald Reagan was in office and the economy was thriving. And so I told my father, well, maybe after I get out of college, I'm going to drive around the country for the summer and go out west and fish. And he and my mother were like, are you kidding me? What, we just put you through college and now you want to go traipse around the country? No, you're getting a job. So fortunate, and we lived in New Jersey, just outside of New York City, it's a commuter town. So I went on spring break and I had lined up several interviews. And I actually had a job working in New York for a large bank, Manufacturers Hanover Trust Company, before I even graduated. And so I got out of college and got my suit on and went to work. I was in a management training program in an operations department of the bank. Basically, operations is you process payments and send the checks and keep all the computer files and all that. So I was bouncing around different departments of the bank, and I was really unhappy with my life and where I was. I had a wonderful girlfriend from college, and I just couldn't commit, and because I just didn't want this life for myself. And I remember being a young kid on the train at like maybe 22 or 23. And I looked at this man on the train, and maybe he was like mid 40s, and he just looked tired and sad. You know, his suit was kind of wrinkled. He had a big can of beer on his briefcase, and he just, you know, and I was just wondering, you know, like, did he just get fired? Did his wife leave him? And is he in a life he doesn't want to be in? And I'm like, and I remember I clearly thinking, it's like, and I don't begrudge people their lives and their choices in lives, and I don't want to judge them, but I did not want to be that when I was 45 years old in a career I didn't pick, and, you know, working for some asshole and having a tough life that I was unhappy about and having regrets. So I continued on my journey in the bank, pursued my outdoor activities on the weekends. And then in about 2 years, I got into a department. It was foreign exchange trading. It was basically, we were money changers, currency trading. And what we would do, there's an exchange rate between the US dollar and other foreign currencies. And it was kind of like trading commodities. That rate is constantly changing. And so we trade big amounts of money, exchange it, you know, between Deutschmarks and the US dollar, yen, and those other currencies. Basically what we were doing was gambling with the bank's money to make a profit. So I got into the back office of this department, and I looked out at this trading desk, and we were just processing payments. So every currency exchange you make has to have a delivery of that money to another bank. So if I did a trade in Deutschmarks, my Berlin office has to send it to somebody else's bank in Germany. You can't exchange foreign currencies in and out of their country. So I looked out in the trading room, and there's like all these young guys, like, you know, my age, maybe a little bit older. And they're just like standing up and laughing and like throwing a football around and yelling and screaming, talking on two phones at the same time, slamming them down. And I'm like, wow, this looks cool. What's going on here? And so, you know, I watched them and thought, boy, that'd be a good opportunity to maybe get into there. And so at the time in Wall Street, firms would like poach traders from other firms. So they'd like hire the whole desk. They'd hire 6 traders from one bank and just take them, and they'd put them into theirs. So this is what happened at our bank. And a bunch of the good traders got poached, and they needed people. They needed warm bodies to fill the seats, and they needed a junior trader. And, you know, you start as a junior, you do the grunt work and work your way up. And they're like, do you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And so it was really a very fun and exciting time. And I remember at that time, I really enjoyed what I was doing. I liked going to work. I was young. It was fast paced. You know, it was like being in college again. And you had tremendous free reign. As long as you traded, did your job, made money for the bank, they pretty much let us go. We didn't have deadlines or meetings or, you know, reports or presentations or any of that crap. It was just a game. And so I loved it. And it's just, you know, you hear people talk about the big 80s, and I don't know if you've ever seen The Wolf of Wall Street.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I was like, was it like The Wolf of Wall Street? That's what I've been like on the tip of my tongue.
So not as extreme as the movie, but yes, it was pretty extreme. We had, you know, expense accounts. We had brokers that would entertain us. And, you know, we went to I was, you know, 25 years old, dining at the finest restaurants in New York City that I could never afford on my own dime. I mean, there was champagne and caviar. And I remember sitting in this Russian restaurant doing shots of frozen vodka, eating caviar and drinking champagne. And I'm just like some punk kid. And there was oceans and oceans of alcohol. There were illicit drugs and lots of strippers. And some I partook in, some I did not. I will leave that to the imagination. So being 25 and only a couple years out of college, I mean, this was pretty fun and wild. But, over time, it was very stressful. You had to make money. If you didn't make money, you got fired. They'd give you a budget. You have to make, $1 million for this year. And you'd get a bonus based on your revenue, what you generated. But then every year it was like, okay, well, yeah, you achieved your target, but the bank's not doing that well, so we really can't give you the bonus that we promised you, and it's going to be pretty light. Oh, and by the way, since you did so well in meeting your targets, we're going to raise it 30% for next year. It's like, so make sure you hit it or we're going to fire you.
The ladder just kept getting taller and taller. You just had to keep climbing.
Yeah. And currency markets are a 24/7 market. They're always open. It's not like a stock exchange that opens at 9 and closes at 4. And so they travel around the world too. So we'd have positions, in currencies that we'd have to monitor overnight. So we'd be on the phone in the middle of the night. I'd get a call from a Tokyo office saying, my position was going south or I made money. Do I want to take profit? So you never had any rest. You're out partying, you come home, the phone rings at 2:00 in the morning. You get up. We had to be in the office at 7 a.m. and it just started right over again. So this was great. It was still fun, exciting. As time went on though, I looked around and there wasn't anybody over 40 doing this. And because of the burnout factor of it. And it was a bunch of young guys, and you think, Wall Street, they're Wharton business school guys or have their MBAs, but really the traders, most of the ones that I worked with were kind of like just regular guys, from Brooklyn, New Jersey. Yeah, they had a college degree, but they were, kind of rough and fast paced and, they're hustlers and, there's a lot of swearing and it was a pretty rough environment. But I enjoyed it. I think with my ADD really helped my personality because everything was just changing constantly and you're just always making different decisions. So as time went on, we're getting into the early 90s. Mergers and acquisitions were a big part of business back then. And what was happening was that in the banking industry, a lot of the major banks in the United States and New York were beginning to merge. And I worked for Manufacturers Hanover Trust Company, which is non-existent now, and it's part of the J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, which is about 5 or 6 banks that merged over the years. So the first merger I went through was Chemical Bank merged with our bank. And I survived that merger, but I watched them fire half the people in the bank, in my department. And I remember, I have these moments that just stick with me. And I remember when one friend, he was, I don't know, maybe 29, but he had like 4 kids. He lost his job and he had like 4 little kids, one with special needs. And he was crying. And I was like, oh my God. And it just had a big impact. And again, I was like, well, I'm not going to let this happen to me. And so I survived that merger and I bounced around from different banks over the years. But I always had this unsettling feeling that this wasn't my be all end all because one, it wasn't my true passion. And then I realized looking at this that there isn't a future in this. At some point in my life, in my late 30s or 40s, I got to find a new career. And I may be out on my ass if getting caught up in all these mergers. So I bounced around to a couple of foreign banks and, tried to make a living doing it. The business got harder, the margins got tighter, it became more competitive. And then technology took over. And that took a lot of the human factor out of it. And it changed the industry. And, just like manufacturing has been impacted by technology, so was what we did. And now there's only a fraction of the people doing what we do. It's all computer generated. So the writing was on the wall and I bounced around some ideas and thought about maybe getting into teaching. My mother was a teacher. I didn't want to be a salesman. My dad was a salesman. And so, always had this dream of living in Montana and, living out my dream. And I remember I did ski trip. The one benefit of making a good living, I got to take lots of good trips. So every winter, I'm an avid skier too. We take trips out west, and then I do my 2-week summer vacation every year in Montana. And I spent all my free time, my vacation time, out west. And I remember we went to British Columbia to Whistler, and it was probably 1990, maybe 91. And we had the opportunity to go heli skiing, and which, if you're a skier, it's an amazing experience for, untracked, bottomless powder. And it was a wonderful day and a wonderful experience. And I've never done it since, but it was incredible. So we stop in this big meadow, and they bring out like hot tea and lunch, and we're all talking to the guides. And so I started talking to the one guide, and he was a mountain guide, ski guide. And I said, so what do you do the rest of the year? And he's like, well, I'm a river guide. And I was like, and he had a family, and he's a nice guy. I'm like, wow, you mean you can make a living at this? And that like planted the seed. Like, maybe I can make a living doing the two things I like most, fly fishing and skiing. And so that started my track. And then over the years, several things happened. My dad passed away. That had a big impact in my life. He and I were very close, and I loved him very much. And some people think, with my story, I would resent my parents, but I don't, because their intent was that I have a good life, but it was in the realm of the way they grew up. And for them to have your own home and a good job, that was their dream. And they had that, and they couldn't understand. Dad was like, work and fun don't go together.
Did he pass away while you were still working in Wall Street, or did he pass away when you were...
I was still on Wall Street when he passed away. And that had a big impact on me. I mean, it just, you look at your life, and do I want to look back, and, what do I want to leave behind? I think I had like an early midlife crisis. But, they instilled a lot of good things in us, and, a good work ethic and a good education was the path to a better life. And I'm actually glad I started my career later, because I got business experience. I saved my money so I could live on a much lower salary out in Montana. So a lot of real good things came from it. So finally, one thing led to another. I'd been coming to Montana every summer and traveling around the state and hitting all the different rivers. And I said, I'm going to do this. I talked to some folks about it, and I actually went to a career counselor. I was taking tests to kind of think about what career I could do. And she was like, you're really passionate about the outdoors. You need to follow that. And so I was like, all right, I'm in. And I talked to my brothers and sister, who were not surprised. And they were all for it, and my mother, she was horrified that I would give up my career to be a fishing guide of all things, and a ski bum. And she was just mortified. And it took her a long while to come around. So in 1999, I was 37. I decided to move to Missoula. I fished the Madison area a lot, in the Yellowstone area, when I was younger as a kid and in my 20s. And I felt that area was really well exploited, even by the 1990s. And I had some friends who a couple summers came out, and they were fishing the Missoula area. And they said, why don't you come out and meet us? And our vacations coincided. So in the early 90s, I came out to Missoula, and we fished the Blackfoot and the Bitterroot. And, this was something that I hadn't really read much about. Everything that you read was, the Henry's Fork, the Madison, the Yellowstone. And the only thing written about the Clark Fork was that it was polluted. And even some of the things I read about the Bitterroot were not that positive. It was dewatered and it was a busy valley. But I got out on the Bitterroot and I was like, this is amazing. And I love the three rivers. You could fish the Blackfoot. You could actually fish Rock Creek too. And I was like, wow, what a choice. And not a lot of people, it wasn't on their radar. And even though a river runs through it had come out, Robert Redford said they couldn't film it on the Blackfoot because it had been so degraded from logging and mining over the years. So I figured this would be a good place to start. And so my goal was to live in Missoula, because I was young, in my 30s. I didn't want to be like a single 37-year-old guy in some little podunk town. I'd never meet anyone. And so I got to Missoula in the fall. I couldn't find a place to live. There wasn't much housing there then. And I came in the fall. So all the college students had rented everything. So I finally found a place in Stevensville on Stevie River Road. And it was a little rental on the river. And I'm like, well, that can't be bad. It was like $600 a month. And I said, well, and it was like a 2-bedroom. So I'm like, all right, I'll do this and I'll live here for a year and then I'll move to Missoula. And I haven't left Stevensville since. I've lived there for 21 years. So, and I just love the Bitterroot. I'm an avid dry fly fisherman, and the Bitterroot's probably one of the best dry fly rivers in the state, most abundant hatches. And I never saw a river where you could fish dry flies from March till November. It was just incredible. And, I started working for other outfitters, and then over a few years, got my outfitting license and kind of took it off from there. And, I just, I love it. I love the business aspect of it. I love the people. I love that I'm outdoors every day on the river, and I have no regrets, and I've never looked back.
Well, and how does your mom feel? I mean, did she change her views on your newfound profession? She
did on Montana. So it took some really bad circumstances for her to come around. Initially, I had her out here, and a year or two later, my brother brought her out, and she's like, well, I know why you like it here. It's beautiful. But she never accepted it. I remember I went home for Christmas one year, and I stayed with her for a couple days, and I was out partying with some of my old friends, and I was sleeping in, and she came in. She's like, it was like 10 o'clock. She's like, when are you going to get up? And I was like, I don't know, Mom. I'm on vacation. Can I sleep in? And she just looked at me pissed off, and she goes, your life is a vacation. And she turned around and walked out of the room.
No.
Yes.
It's so funny because, Justin guides here and there. And I think there's this idea that, everyone's like, oh, what a dream job. And and it is a dream job in so many senses that you do get to do what you love. But it is a lot of work. You're waking up, 5 in the morning when if you have some further places to go, you're getting the cooler. You're also a chef. You're also a safety person. You want to make sure that everyone is safe in the boat. So you're constantly looking. And then by the time you get done with the river, it's 10 o'clock. You're cleaning the boat. And then you're back up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And for Justin, he's constantly thinking about, what do I need to do tomorrow to try and get my clients on some fish? And and you're also trying to think, if I don't get my clients some fish, how am I going to make this a good experience for them? So you're an entertainer. Right. There's a lot of hats you have to wear. So it's
I do resent that a little when people say that. Oh, you have and I do have a great job. I'm not stuck in an office. I'm outdoors, but it's not like I don't work. Like you said, you're up at 5 in the morning. You got to do lunches. You got to tie some extra flies that you're running out of. It's physically demanding rowing. You're out in the hot sun. You have people that don't have that much skill, and maybe the conditions are tough. Like, how am I going to get this person into some fish? And I take every trip as like, this means so much to them. I want this to be their best trip ever.
Yes.
And it's pressure. And then because we're seasonal, you work 7 days a week.
Yes.
And for 3 weeks in a row, and it is a job, and it's a business. And I spend a lot of time on the business at night. And then I come home, I got to answer phone calls and line up guides. And I love it though. But I think some people have that, glorified image. We do work hard. And a lot of my clients get it. They look at me and they say, well, you work pretty hard all day.
Well, and especially with you being a guide since 1999, you kind of have your clientele. They're like, I know who this is. But the biggest thing that you can tell on all the guide outfitters is look at their hands. Justin's hands look so awful. In terms of, there's calluses, he rows the boat and his shoulders hurt, and it's a taxing job on the body. And it's one of those things. And like you said, you get done with the season, but then you're constantly trying to fill in other work when you're not working. And it's a life, you pay for that lifestyle. And you pay with it with your body and energy. I also have to say, I really do appreciate when I was reading about your bio, is that you said you also have patience. And I think as a guide, because I take this from my husband, who's been teaching me how to fly fish, and how much patience it really takes somebody to learn how to fish. Because I can tell you that, and maybe it's just because it's a spousal thing, but sometimes Justin's like 45 degrees to the boat, and I'll be like doing it. He's like, I said 45 degrees to the boat. I'm like, wait, I did do 45. He's like, Lauren, do I need to teach you some math skills? So it is one of those things too that you kind of forget about. That's a very important skill for a guide and outfitter.
Absolutely. And I got the greatest compliment. One lady told me, she's like, you're so patient. You should have like 7 kids. I'm like, no, thank you.
You're like, I my kids can be sometimes the people on the boat. I also saw that you did receive the Outstanding Outfitter of the Year in 2014. I mean, that is a huge award. And can you tell me a little bit about how you achieved that?
Yeah, it was from the Montana chapter of the American Fisheries Society, which is made up of, pretty much fisheries biologists from around the country. But this was particularly the Montana chapter. And they gave it to me for my work in conservation over the years. And I was really proud of that. And I work a lot. I've always grown up with the ethic that, and it seemed like everything I read about fly fishing and trout fishing was kind of conservation and went hand in hand with trout fishing and fly fishing. So I was a TU member since I was a kid. And then I really wanted to get active when I came out here. So I was on the chapter, the Bitterroot chapter, and I was 2 years as the president, worked on a little bit of restoration. I did a lot of advocacy at the state level, speaking against cyanide heap leach mining, motorized restrictions on the Clark Fork, trying to think of some of the other things, setbacks from development to try to protect the resources. And then after that stint with Trout Unlimited, I had an opportunity to join an organization called the Bitterroot Water Forum. It was a small nonprofit, and it was started by some ladies in the Bitterroot, and it pretty much was just a forum. They talked, had meetings, and did advocacy on water-related issues in the Bitterroot. And it was kind of going under through lack of support. Didn't have much money, and it was probably going to fade. So one of the fellas who decided to get on the board and be the president asked me if I would like to join. And I said, I was kind of burned out by my 5 years of on Trout Unlimited. I felt like I spent a lot of time fighting battles and arguing and just not getting anywhere. I put a lot of time and effort in, and I didn't have much to show for it on the ground. We only did one. I did a Embrace the Stream grant and project, which was great. But the other stuff's like, wow, I put a lot of time into this, and I really don't feel like I've achieved much. So I told him, I said, I will do this, but I want us to focus this organization on habitat restoration, because I feel without, Montana's dependent on wild trout. You can't have a healthy fishery without the habitat that they're dependent on. And I always felt that was a part of Trout Unlimited. A big deal of it was protecting and restoring habitat. So I said, I'll do this as long as we do habitat, and I don't want to do any kind of legal battles or arguments. And I think as a watershed group, we need to be neutral and represent all the users of the watershed. And because as soon as you take a side, you alienate people, and things are so divided, in the Bitterroot, it's so political. And I just said, it's like banging your head against the wall. You have nothing to show for it, and you just get frustrated. So he said, fine. He goes, I'm happy. We'll run it that way. And so that's the way the organization is run. And we kind of rubbed a couple nickels together. We were able to hire a young lady as our executive director, and we could only pay her half time, but her boyfriend was out here. She wanted to move to Montana, and we hired her, and we found enough money. She got grants and ran full time. And now we have a staff of 4 people and an AmeriCorps member. And the water forum, I'm not on the board anymore. I was on for 9 years and I was the board chair and I termed out, but they've restored, miles and miles of tributary streams in the Bitterroot watershed, which, as you know, the tribs are the hatcheries of the big river. And there are a lot of problems with sediment and nutrient and temperature pollution. And that's where a lot of the focus was on that. So I guess for all of those things is why I got that award from the American Fisheries Society. So it was a really important thing for me, because here's some biologists giving me an award when I wanted to be a fisheries biologist when I was a kid, but my dad wouldn't let me. And so at least, hey, I'm getting I'm a struggling fisheries biologist, I guess.
It kind of comes full circle. I mean, I have to say, yeah. I think I see a little bit of Wall Street with your work to make angling and fishing in the rivers better. Like you're also juggling and promoting that. So I feel that we still have a little bit of Wall Street in you.
Yeah, I read a thing about Paul Roos recently, who passed away. He was a famous Montana outfitter, and he started working for a fellow by the name of Pat Barnes in West Yellowstone. And I remember this quote. I wrote an article about him in my newspaper column, that conservation and good business go hand in hand. And he taught him that ethic. But, it's not just the business aspect of it. I just love trout streams and the places they live. And I'm so passionate about it. Business aside, I want to save that for myself and other people in that experience.
Well, and it really takes people to be passionate about changes, because if we don't have people who are passionate, things won't be changed. So thank you so much for being passionate angler, because you do, as I go on the river and I have these moments of being on Raw Creek or on the Bitterroot, and it's so beautiful, you think that's because it's naturally like that. And it is naturally beautiful, but it takes effort to continue to keep the natural beauty, because there's a lot of forces. As Montana is getting bigger, people are coming on people are coming to fish, which as they should, but there's times where you're on the river and you do worry about it. You're like, there's a lot of people on the river today. Are the fish going to be okay? And I think it's good for people to question and to be passionate to bring these issues up, because if we don't talk about it, and there won't be changes. So thank you for being a voice for the beauty of Montana and the rivers and the fish that live in it and the people who want to enjoy it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, it is. And I think we don't say thank you enough. And I think it's seriously one of those things that these days I like to just be like, oh, I get to live in Missoula and I get to go down by the river, and there's people who are really working really hard to make sure that that's something I get to do every day, because if we don't, it'll be shut and it'll be taken away from us. And so thank you so much. So Eddie, is there a good way? I mean, coronavirus is obviously affected. I hate even saying that all the time. Like, coronavirus is affecting our economy and also guides. Are you planning the spring season is coming up? Are you taking people? How do people get in touch with you if they want a guide with Eddie Olwell?
Well, I am booking trips for next year. I think now the latest news says that the second half from June on next year may be back to somewhat normalcy as the vaccine gets distributed. So I'm still booking trips. And I'll book trips for March and April. If people haven't heard of the Bitterroot, it's famous for that spring squalla hatch, which is a large stonefly. But if they do want to call me, they can call me at 406-207-5678. I have a website. It's fishseddio.com, and it's spelled FISHSEDDYO.com. And I also have email eddie@fishseddio.com. There's a good story about the name of my business.
Actually, that was going to be my next question. I'm curious, how did you come up with Fishs Eddy O?
Well, I thought it was a really good idea for a business name, but in hindsight, a business in Montana, not so good. We used to fish the East Branch of the Delaware River in upstate New York, the Delaware is a great tailwater fishery. It's There's 2 dams on the east and the west branch from the New York City reservoir system. And it's a true tailwater, and it's all wild fish. And they market it as, the best Western fishing east of the Mississippi. And it really is. I mean, we don't have the numbers that we do out here, but big wild fish. So there was a town on the east branch of the Delaware called Fishs Eddy. All the towns along the Delaware are named after an eddy in the river. So there's Deep Eddy, Pond Eddy, Long Eddy, and there's this one town called Fishs Eddy, and they spell it Fishs, and I have no idea why they do that. That was one of the first mistakes. So my nickname has been Eddie O since I was a kid, and so my friends and I would go fishing, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna go stop at Fishs Eddy O and do some fishing," and we named that town, became Fishs Eddy O, and I thought, wow, what a great name for a fly fishing business. Well, yeah, if I was in upstate in the Catskills, people would get it. I came out here, nobody knows what the hell Fishs Eddy is. They say you spell fishes wrong because there's no E in it, S. Every time I try to give somebody my website, it's like they get the spelling wrong because they put the E in fishes. So it's been like a total disaster, but I've had it for 21 years. I got to stick with it.
Yeah, you're like, I stuck with it. Now everybody knows me.
Yeah.
And to be honest, though, it does kind of stick into your mind. Like, oh, did he mean to spell it without the E?
Yeah.
But what a great story. I love it. So real quick question before we sign out. What is your go-to guide fly?
Yeah.
I want to know.
I've been thinking a lot about this. It's the one that's working at the time. Really, I love my go-to fly is a dry fly. I love to dry fly fish, and I love to match the hatch. That's what I learned, technical dry fly fishing on the Delaware, and I just really enjoy that. And I know people always ask that question, "What's your favorite fly?" But I'm always changing. Different times a year, you're fishing a different dry fly. So I really don't have a favorite go-to fly. It's whatever dry fly's working at the time.
See, Eddie, you're already the best guide out there. You're like, if someone was like, it's this fly, you're like, even during the May fly, that's what fly you're going to be using. So see, yeah. You're already, you're on top of it, Eddie. You already know what's on the river. So I appreciate you talking with me today and hearing your stories. And I really do hope that we get together and maybe we can do some social distancing casting.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.